But, you know, I guess while we're waiting for some of the last few students to show up, does anybody have any comments, questions, anything that's kind of come up over the last week that they, you know, want to bring up? Anybody still having trouble? Anybody having trouble getting a hold of the textbook? I hope not, because by now you should have it, some sort of copy of it. All right. Well, it sounds like everybody's, you know, on board with what's going on, and no questions, no confusion. So, without further ado, we'll get into Plato. So today we're gonna do a little bit more of what we did last time. We'll talk a bit about you know, Socrates. Oh, somebody said they were able to get a free PDF version of it. Yeah. Maybe we shouldn't advertise that too much since this video is on YouTube. But yeah, maybe get with the other students on the discussion board and figure that thing out on your own. I'll just look the other way. But yeah, so anyway, so like, yeah, last time we were talking about Plato, Plato's Republic. There were some excerpts from some other work, The Statesman. We were talking about the different types of measure, and we got into, I guess, so the main topic of conversation when it came to Plato was the censorship that was going to be involved in the Republic, the proper way to honor the gods, I suppose, in art and poetry. So that was one thing we looked at, and sort of what the nature of the gods must be and how they must be represented properly. And then even how the guardians. So remember, in Plato's Republic, there are these groups, these three groups of people. I don't know how in depth we got into that, but I think we did touch on this, right? That they're in Plato's society, there'll be the philosopher kings who are the rulers, and they won't do any poetry or writing, but they have to make sure that the poetry and the writing is proper. And beneath them are the guardians. Those are the warriors who protect everybody. And so he's talking really mainly about them and in these excerpts that we'll be looking at. How are we supposed, you know, we want them to be brave. We want to raise them to be these brave, fierce warriors. So what kind of poetry, what kind of art should we allow them to see? And then, okay, so today we're going to elaborate a little bit more on that, sort of what kind of poetry is proper for who in the Republic. And I'm hoping that by the end of class today, we'll talk about Plato's forms. I think that there were a couple of students, maybe you've taken a class of philosophy before this. I knew a couple of students last time. Maybe I'm getting my classes mixed up. I do that sometimes. But I think somebody was mentioning Plato's forms last week. And so some of you might have been in, like, what are the forms? What is he talking about? In a way, I touched on it. We were talking about the two types of measure. There's the measure that is relative, is one way he puts it. You know, taller than, shorter than, bigger than, smaller than, and are good for this, good for that. But then there's this ideal standard, which is just what is appropriate. So you might, you know, for like an example, you might say that this dress is a darker color than the other dress, or this dress is made with cotton and this one's made with silk, or whatever. And those are just sort of like, I guess, a relative measurement, like the type of fabric, the color. Like these are sort of like tenths, or, you know, different values that would be sort of the first type of measurement. But which one is good, right? Like what's the right proportion of the dress to make it a good dress, to make it a beautiful dress? This would be something that he's going to say is the ideal standard, that isn't relative. Okay, so that was a bit of a foreshadowing of the forms. So again, we'll talk more about those later today, probably after the first part of the class. I think we still have a lot more to cover when it comes to the Republic, but it looks like I have a full head count, or pretty close to it. So that's really good. Maybe I'll pause just for a second now that there's a few more people here, and just to see if there's any other questions. As usual, you can type it in the chat box, or you can just unmute your mic. No? Okay, so all right, let me share the screen here and get back to the PowerPoint that I have here. So we left off, I guess we talked about, let me back up to the previous slide, because we went over this one. This is the last thing we covered at the end of class. And so just to kind of, I guess, to jog all of our memories, you know, he says that when we represent justice, we have to do it in a way such that justice is always represented as good and beneficial to those who are just. We should never represent in art or poetry or literature somebody who is evil and doing bad things succeeding, right? And I think we got a little bit of class discussion out of this, but does anybody else have any thoughts maybe that have popped into your mind? To be honest with you, I have a picture up here of the Wolf of Wall Street, and I want to make clear I'm probably not really talking about this movie with what I'm about to say, but there are some movies where I kind of enjoy it where there's not a happy ending, right? Where the bad guy gets away with it or something. Even though like I might think, oh, that was wrong, I still might think it's a good movie and it affects me in a way. And I don't know, it seems like what Plato is asking for here, he wants every movie to basically be a Disney movie in the Republic, right? The good guy always gets the princess, and the evil doer gets his reward, his desserts, gets punished or whatever, and that sort of thing. But anybody have any thoughts on this? Again, he's saying that art should not represent this, and this is, you might say, this is a theme that I think Plato takes it to the extreme. But this is not a theme that is just unique to him. You might find some other philosophers that we're going to look at later in the semester having similar sentiments. This idea that art has to represent to us the best of things. It has to represent to us the ideal of reality. What is the best? These perfect archetypes. You might use that word if you're Jungian or something. But what do you think? Does art have to be this? Anybody have any opinions on this? It looks like I have something in the chat box, so let me look here. Strongly disagree. Yeah, I strongly disagree as well. Let's see what else they say. This is Eduardo. I strongly disagree. I think both schools of thought can be interesting stories, but having only one or the other can make art boring. Yeah, I agree too. I think that if every work of art was just super realistic and depressing, that would kind of suck too. But if it was all just fantasy and every time it was a happy ending, that would get kind of boring. But I think that's just that's an aesthetic judgment here, I suppose, that you're making, and I think I'm making as well. We're just talking about whether it's a good work of art and whether it's something that we would enjoy to watch. But what Plato has in mind here too is the impact of art, I suppose, on society, right? It's all ad hoc. We can't force everything to be the same. The second part of your comment there, Hassan, we can't force everything to be the same. That's pretty clear. But what do you mean by ad hoc? So ad hoc, for those of you who don't know, it's sort of like you're just sort of making something up on the spot. So are you saying art is that way? Like when you make art, it's just ad hoc. You're just sort of making stuff up. So it's got to be different. It's just spontaneous. It's all. And he's got quotes around this, for this artist specific. Oh, so there's always a purpose in mind, I guess is what you're saying. This sounds a bit like Aristotle. When we get to Aristotle, he seems to think that art, okay, cool. So, okay, all right. I guess I get what you're saying. Yeah, so for Aristotle, he would say the same thing. When an artist makes a work of art, there's some purpose in mind. And the way that he would judge a work of art is how well it executes that purpose, how well it fulfills that purpose. But we're jumping ahead here. Let's try to keep it on Plato. Again, though, he's trying to make this judgment about how art, whether or not it's good art, like whether or not you enjoy it. In fact, if there's art that you enjoy, like let's say you really like that movie Wolf of Wall Street, you thought it was a really good film. Plato would be worried that you would want to copy the main character in that film and be like him, and you would be evil too. So that's sort of his argument here. Does anybody have any thoughts on that?
I feel like he kind of has a point, because I've seen a lot of movies where like Breaking Bad, a lot of people really liked Walter White, even though the point of the show was to show that like Walter White is not someone you should impersonate. So I guess in some cases, like, sure, Aristotle has a point, like people will want to emulate it, even if it's not something that should be emulated. But I don't think that's like a measure of bad art. It's just a measure, or not even a measure. It's just kind of like, I feel like it's more indicative of the person watching the art as opposed to the art itself.
Right. Yeah. So maybe, I think that's a good point you make. I forgot what comedian it was. I think it was like Bill Burr or something was joking about this, about how, like, you're not just going to see a poster and then, go out and want to kill someone because you see Rambo on it. I mean, we're not that stupid. We're not that naive. We're not that dumb or something like this. But I do think, on the other hand, maybe there is something to this, perhaps, like, I mean, don't people try to emulate artists and things like that? I remember when, like,
Yeah, for sure.
yeah. I mean, it seems like, like the whole gangster rap thing. I remember in the '80s, this was completely overblown. I believe the media overblew it. But I remember growing up in San Antonio. I was in a kind of a working class neighborhood, I suppose. We weren't super poor, we weren't super rich. But I remember, like, when like NWA came out, like in the late '80s and stuff, and I was I guess I was like in middle school, or right before high school, and they were like these suburban kids that were just like, we wanted to be gangster. We would do like, I mean, I guess I could say it now because that's past the statute of limitations, but we would like steal stuff, and we thought we were hard. And I mean, it was like, it was ridiculous. It was a joke, if like some actual like South Central gang member crossed our path, they would eat us for breakfast. But it seemed like we did try to emulate those values. We did try to, like, be these hard, criminals or whatever. I do think, though, like, I think your point is definitely well taken. I would say that the media overblows this. I remember this was when I was right out of high school, when the Columbine shooting happened. And, for those who aren't familiar with the Columbine shooting, was one of the first major school shootings. I think it happened in early 2000s, maybe the late 90s. But anyway, they were all the psychologists and sociologists and all the media people, all the politicians and pundits were trying to figure out why the school shooting happened, and a lot of them were trying to blame, I think it was Marilyn Manson, and there was another band who most of you probably never heard of called KMFDM. But they said that these two bands, oh, and there was also the video game Doom. Yeah, that's right. Somebody put it in the comments. They were blaming Doom on it, right? So they played this video game Doom where you go around shooting people, and they would listen to this Marilyn Manson music, and so that's what made them want to go kill. And I think, to me, that really takes a lot of responsibility off these kids, the kids' family. I mean, who knows what was going on, the dynamic in the community, that these kids were undetected, or I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of factors it could be. I think maybe this is really, oversimplifying things. Let's see. I believe somebody has some good comments in here. I believe the extremes of these art forms should be suppressed. However, we should include everything that's real in our world. Well, it seems like you're contradicting yourselves. Like, which one is it? It's like, some should be suppressed, but others, like, maybe that's okay, but you have to draw a line. Where is it okay to suppress, and when is it not? And how you determine. To me, it seems like it's a very individual thing. Some people might be more easily influenced than others, I suppose. So it seems like it'd be really hard. Let's just assume this is correct, that art can make people want to go kill someone. It seems like it's probably less true for some people than others. Is there a threshold? There's like sort of a standard threshold for every, how violent we can be. Someone says Doom is actually a pro-Christian game. I didn't know that. I had no idea about that, but I don't want to get off topic. So maybe we shouldn't go down that rabbit hole. But that's interesting. I'll have to look that up later. I know there's a lot of
joke.
There's a joke. Okay, all right. I was gonna say, wow. I know there's a lot of things that aren't obvious. A lot of like these, I know, like, what is it? Chronicles of Narnia is supposed to be like a Christian allegory, and as a kid, I had no idea. Now it's pretty obvious. But anyway, all of this that we, so far, just kind of, it's almost just a recap of last time. Let's move on to this new material and see what else Plato has to say in the Republic. So he seems to categorize art, or what he's calling poetry here. I think we talked about this last time. The Greek word poesis simply means to bring something forth, to create. So any form of creation. And so he's saying the poets, what do? They either, when they're creating their poetry, there's three types. There's either just simple, straightforward narration. There's what he's calling imitation. And most of like what we would consider art in our culture, he would probably categorize in the second category, imitative art. Some of it is mixed, right? So that's the third category. It's a combination of narration, imitation. What is he talking about here? What's the difference? He gives a couple examples in the text. I guess I could explain it, but maybe somebody else could take a stab at it if you want. What's the difference? Like, what's simple narration, imitation? What's just the first? I guess you really just have to explain the first two, and the third one is kind of, combination, just self-explanatory. What does he mean by like simple narration? He gives the example. He says Homer, for instance, like the epic poet. If you've ever read the Iliad or the Odyssey, he says Homer does both. There's a combination of narration and imitation. That's one of the examples he gives. So if you've read Homer, that might give you a clue. No one's it's kind of a difficult passage. It's not really obvious what he's talking about. So what does it mean to narrate something? Like if you watch a documentary, what's the narrator do? You don't know what a narrator is in a documentary? No one? They read a script, right? So what's the script basically? The script is basically telling you about what you're looking at. It's basically describing what you're seeing. This is Dr. So-and-so doing research at this facility, and we found out, that's usually what the narrator does. And so in Homer, for instance, if you read the Iliad, it opens up with just simple narration. It talks about, it's been a while since I read the Iliad. I think it's quoted here, though. It just talks about, the ships all, going, sailing towards Troy and the danger of the sea. And so he's just talking about something that's happening. He's telling you a story. He's just narrating these events. Imitation, though, sometimes if you read the Iliad, he'll actually be speaking in the voices of the heroes, where he'll be like, and then Achilles said, da da da, and then he'll like actually give you a whole, line of what Achilles says. So that's what Plato's calling imitation. If you go to see a play, you go down to the Alley Theater here in Houston and go watch a Tennessee Williams play, or a newly written play, a world premiere or something, right? The actors on the stage are going to be imitating. They're going to be acting like the characters. So that'd be the second form. I guess there might be some exceptions to this. Is if anybody's familiar with Our Town, who wrote that? Geez, Thornton Wilder, I think, is the author of Our Town. It's a play that, I don't know if they do this anymore, but they used to, every kid used to have, another word for imitation is acting. Well, somebody said that. Another word for imitation is acting. The Greek word is mimesis. I think we went over this last time. Let me type that in the chat box here. M-I-M-E-S-I-S, mimesis, which means to mimic or to imitate. So acting is just one form of it. But even if you're reading a poem and the poem has actual dialogue, it actually has a dialogue between two characters, Plato would say that's also a form of mimesis. So Homer, when he's writing, let's say there's a scene between Achilles and Agamemnon, and they're butting heads, like the very beginning of the Iliad, that first book where there's this big, this big fight over the slave girl or whatever. Okay, so that is Plato's going to say when there's this long passage of Homer, and all it is talking. That is Homer imitating the scene. He's imitating what went on. At the beginning, he makes it very clear that he's not there. He's representing something that happened a long time ago, and he's just telling you a story of what happens. Okay. And so Homer does both, right? It's got a little bit of narration in it. If you ever read the Iliad or the Odyssey, it'll talk about, Odysseus sailed this way, and then he went to this island. But then also there'll be long passages of mimesis, of imitation.
I have a question.
Sure.
So is he saying that like simple narration would be something like the author is like using the first person, or just talking from their own perspective rather
Right.
than from other people's perspective?
Right. In fact, I think that's well, he doesn't say it exactly in your words, but that's one way he puts it, is that whoever's speaking is speaking as themselves. They're not imitating anything else. They aren't copying someone else. They aren't, mimicking, right? So yeah, that's a good way to put it.
And does that go back to the fact that like he doesn't think that what was it? Being deceitful, like it would be deceitful to like imitate someone.
Right. Yeah. You're seeing where this is going, I think. Yeah. Exactly. Good comment. Exactly. He's not going to like this. He doesn't like this part of art, the mimetic part, you might say. Good. So where is he going with this? It looks like you already, at least one of our students kind of sees where this is going. So let's see, Hassan said, so imitation is like narration but deeper. I wouldn't put it that way. I would say that narration is more straightforward. And I totally lost track of my point a minute ago. I mentioned Our Town because that one is a little different. There's a character in the play who is a narrator, and he's not in the scenes. He doesn't actually interact with any of the characters. All he does is sort of just tell you the story of the town, and he narrates some of the events and what's going on between some of the scenes. So in that case, I guess he would be a narrator, even though he's in a play. I guess the actor themselves would be playing that character, so they would be doing mimesis. That one's kind of maybe I shouldn't have brought up that example because that maybe confuses things even more. It doesn't quite fit so neatly into Plato's categories here, right? They didn't really, usually their plays didn't have narration like this. They had a chorus, and the chorus, that's debatable what the chorus was supposed to represent, but the chorus would sort of sing in between some scenes and would comment on what was going on. But usually the chorus would be seen as speaking for themselves. So I guess that would be, maybe that just be straight narration. They weren't imitating anything. I don't know, that also gets complicated because if you look to some of the work of Aristophanes, sometimes the chorus are like frogs. Like in his work, The Frogs, they're all dressed up like frogs, making ribbit noises. And Plato would not like that. You'll see why in just a moment. So moving on to the next slide. Again, just as I guess is a little bit more elaboration on these different types. Okay, so comedy and tragedy are, he says, wholly imitative. So when you go to see a play, all the people on the stage are playing a character. Okay. A wholly narrative, he gives the example of a dithyramb. Did I talk about a dithyramb last time? Do we know what that is? Does anybody know what a dithyramb is? No one sings those anymore. Okay, so a dithyramb, it's a folk song to Dionysus. Let me write Dionysus's name in the chat box. Who knows who Dionysus was? Is anyone familiar with the Greek god Dionysus? Yeah, the
god of wine.
God of wine, basically the god of pleasure and being naughty. And a dithyramb would be a folk song that would usually be written on a lyre or a lute, like a stringed instrument. And it was just the person would be singing about Dionysus from their own perspective. So those would be seen as wholly narrative. And then, of course, the example I gave, which is a combination of the two, something like Homer, the epic poetry of Homer. You've got these long passages of just straight narration where the poet is speaking from his own voice. And then you have long passages where the poet is imitating characters, right? He's saying what he thinks they said and how they interacted with each other. And so Plato would classify that as mimesis. So for him, he says, and again, somebody, I forgot who it was, somebody that just jumped in. Was it Danny? Somebody said he's not going to like this, is he? Mimesis. Yeah, spot on. He actually thinks that mimesis should actually be prohibited. We shouldn't allow it in the perfect society. So no comedy or tragedy in the Republic. Boo. Okay, so I don't know if I'd want to live in Plato's utopia. I think that this would be pretty lame as far as, at least there wouldn't be much good art to enjoy. But let's see his argument here. What's the problem with mimesis? These are just a string of quotes that I got from the textbook here to kind of get at the main points of some of his argument. But this one is not super intuitive if you look at it. This first quote, he says, one man can only do one thing well and not many. And if he attempt many, he will fail at gaining a reputation in any. So Plato is arguing against jack of all trades. Well, no, I suppose he's actually arguing for the old expression, jack of all trades, master of none. Has anybody heard that before? Jack of all trades, master of none. You know what that means? Anybody familiar with that? What does it mean to be a jack of all trades, but a master of none? What's a jack in that? Is it good to be a jack of all trades? Yeah, you do all. Yeah, somebody Hassan said it. You do all things okay, but nothing great. He said good, but you're not like excellent at anything. So Plato seems to think this is the case. You have to specialize in one thing, and if you try to learn all these other skills, you'll never be a master or really, really great. So somebody says, I'm good at fixing small things at home, but I'm not a plumber, right? So the plumber would be really good at fixing pipes and plumbing, obviously, but he's not going to understand electricity. The electrician specializes in that. He comes to this conclusion in one of the early, I think it's book 2. I think we're already in book 3 by now. But in book 2 of the Republic, they're talking about what it's like when we're first getting society off the ground. And he's talking about how all the things you need for a society, you need shelter, you need food, you need water, you need irrigation, agriculture, tools, you need people to build, manual laborers, all this stuff. And he's like, so if everybody just helped at everything, like we all just built when we needed to build and we all just farmed when we needed to farm, he's like, would that work? Or would it be better to just have one person focus on one part of the task of the city and one person focus on another task? He says, well, certainly it'd be way more efficient if one person would worry about building, one person would worry about growing crops, one person would worry about, protection, to keep our roles separate. Otherwise, everyone's micromanaging everybody. So specialization is the word Gerardo used. Exactly. He says specialization is the way to go. So maybe, on the face of it, his claim here seems kind of weak. It's like, no, I know a guy who's like, he's a master, a kung fu master, and he also speaks 5 languages, and he's also a talented concert pianist or something like that. Maybe what do they call it? A Renaissance man was the old expression. So, but he's Plato's denying that. There's no Renaissance man. You can only be good at one sort of thing. And he thinks, and this is where I think he's completely wrong. This is where I think his argument is pretty weak. He says the same person will hardly be able to play a serious part in life and at the same time be an imitator and to imitate many other parts well. So what he's saying about the crafts, all the different things that you might do if you work in a city and you need to keep the city together, being a blacksmith, being a construction worker, whatever, farmer, that requires specialization. You have to devote your life to one particular trade in order to be good at it and efficient at it. He says the same is true when it comes to imitation. What do you think, though? You think this is the case? That if you're like, let's say you're good at imitating, like you're good at making animal noises to be kind of ridiculous. You're not good at making other kinds of noises. Like you can't make a siren sound. Woo, woo. I don't know. So if you're really good at playing idiots, you can't play smart people if you're an actor. Yeah, somebody said imitating is an art. It's transferable between characters. I think this depends on the actor. I think, what do they call it? Range. Some actors have a really broad range. And I think some can imitate all sorts of things. They can play a serious role. They can play a comedic role. So I think that this point he's making doesn't quite follow. I even really think this argument he's making about specialization doesn't really transfer broadly the way he thinks it does. It's based on the idea of, like just imagine you're in a small area where there's like just 20 or 30 people, you're all hunters and gatherers, and you're like, we're tired of being hunters and gatherers. Let's build society. Let's build a city. You seem to be good at making things. Why don't you be the builder? Oh, and you know what? You seem to be good at hunting. Why don't you go get the meat and all the food? Oh, and you know what? You're really good at plants and growing. Why don't you be the farmer? So he thinks people have a natural knack, or they gravitate towards certain things, and that when you're setting up society, well, of course, people should do what they're good at, and that will benefit everybody and themselves. The problem with this, though, is once society's already built up and we've got a surplus of people and we've got enough farmers and enough guardians and enough, all of this, and we have leisure time, I don't know if this argument really transfers to that situation. It seems like, in today's civilization, like I said, you meet people who have the time, have the energy, have maybe the capacity to learn a skill, like, maybe they want to be a welder because they're like, they want to work with metal, but they also, I don't know. They also like to play soccer or something like that after work, right? So they have these hobbies. So, and maybe they're really good at all these things. So I don't know if he's got such a knockdown argument here, but where's he going with this? How does this apply to his censorship of the arts? He says the guardians, so now we're kind of coming back to his main focus, all these warriors. He says they should only imitate, if they're going to imitate anything, they should only imitate those characters which are suitable to their profession. So people who are courageous, holy, temperate, free, all these things. They should never imitate or depict illiberality or baseness. And so why not? And this is another point that I think is a decent point, but maybe he makes too much of it. It kind of comes back to, I think, what we were discussing at the beginning. Art imitates life, life imitates art, but really how much, can we really blame the Columbine shooting on Marilyn Manson and Doom? But he seems to think there's a lot to that argument. He does. He says, do you ever observe how imitations beginning in early youth, continuing into far into life, at length grow into habits and become second nature, affecting body, voice, and mind? And so I guess, again, this idea here is that you're a product of your environment, right? You're going to imitate those around you who you see. And so when you're looking at art, especially really good art that affects you, you don't want to be seeing bad things, according to Plato, because you're going to want to copy those bad things. When you see that gangster in the movie, when you see Scarface, you're like, look at Scarface, he's a badass, so he has this big mansion and all these girls and cars, and you're going to want to be Scarface, right? I'm not sure if maybe that's an old reference, kind of a cult classic film, but I think Scarface still has a big following, doesn't it? People, they play it on the the TV every once in a while. They're like, yes, I got to see a few yeses in the comments. Obviously,
I have another question.
Yeah, of course.
So would then he consider like art somewhat subjective in a way? Because if, let's say, you're a plumber and you're watching some art piece on plumbing, that wouldn't apply to someone, like an electrician. So wouldn't that make it somewhat subjective? Like, because that would be art to that person, but not to anyone else.
Well, I think maybe what Plato might do with that, and he seems, in the Republic, he seems to just focus on art that's going to be presented to the guardian class. As far as I remember, it's been a while since I read the whole book. He doesn't spend a whole lot. He talks about his philosophers and how they should be educated, but philosophers shouldn't really waste their time with art too much. But your point, I think that might be something he would he'd consider. He'd be like, okay, so if the farmers are going to watch art, they might have. I don't know if he would say it's subjective, because I don't think he would like that idea that there's no truth and that it just depends on the individual. He would say, no, there's objective standards. Like, there's good art for a farmer. There's good art for a electrician, maybe I could see him doing that, having different, show an electrician a movie of a good electrician who has a good family and makes good money and people respect him as an electrician, and so that will inspire him to do his job well. So I think, yeah, you're on the right track. I think this is what he's saying, monkey see, monkey do. So let's show, and it's pretty condescending. Okay, this is sort of you might say, to use a sort of conservative right-wing term, this is kind of a nanny state. This is sort of paternalistic, you might say, that the government's sort of looking over these people who aren't really smart enough to do the right thing for the right reasons. So you have to just trick them with art. And so they're at the bottom of the cave there, looking at the shadows in that allegory we talked about last week, and you want to be a good ruler and show them art that's going to guide them in the right way. So somebody says, isn't there some truth to this though? Propaganda exists after all. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of his point. He's saying, look, people in power are going to use some form of persuasion. I mean, this actually, I don't want to say that's too confidently, but this is definitely a good I mean, I would say it's a justifiable interpretation of Plato, but he seems to be saying that anybody in power is going to be manipulating those below them who aren't able to sort of guide themselves. So you might as well have somebody in power who is wise and philosophical and cares about the good and what's correct and is able to have good propaganda, right? So, I mean, again, I don't know if I'm going to go along with that because, who's going to decide what's good propaganda? Who's going to decide what's good for everybody? I think that's a very complicated issue that, a bunch of philosophers can't just sit around and decide one day. But I can kind of see his point. You're going to have, the people in power who rule typically control the media. They typically control most of the popular forms of art in a society. And so how that art shapes us and shapes our worldview, I mean, it's definitely something to consider, but whether we should take a hold of it or somebody has some comments here. So let me look before I move on here. Didn't Plato hate poets? Yes, he seemed to, maybe hate is too strong of a word, but he certainly distrusted them. He at least feigned respect for some of the more popular poets like Homer and Hesiod. When he was talking about them, he would say good things about them. But he even says here, I don't know if this is in your reading, but at the end of book 3, I think it's book 3, he says we would kick him out of the city. We wouldn't allow Homer in our republic. We would say, you're a good man, you're a genius, you have such skill, but get out. You're going to corrupt everybody because you're so good at your art. You're going to make them imitate these bad people. So again, guardians aren't supposed to imitate women, slaves, bad men, angry men. They're not supposed to imitate, this kind of maybe goes to the comment earlier about art for the electrician, art for the farmer. You don't want them to see movies, I guess, like that. You would probably want to keep the guardians away from that. You don't want them to imitate craftsmen. That's another thing. I think Plato also thought of the craftsman in a sense that was a bit derogatory. You might argue that it's a sort of classist thing that maybe it starts with the Greeks. I mean, maybe you can even trace it back to the Egyptians, but it seems like societies in general, and there's always exceptions to this rule. There's always exceptions. But in general, it seems like the more you work with your hands and the more physical the labor is that you do, the lower class you seem to be. Like that seems to be, oh, you're not as, good of a citizen. You're not as important. So the least amount of physical labor you do, the more you work with your mind, you're higher up or elevated, right? And unless you're an MMA fighter, I like that, right? And then you're like, hey, I'm boss, right? Like might makes right. But yeah, I think that this sort of preconception that if you're a craftsman, you make your living with a trade, that somehow demotes you. Even though, man, those guys make good money. I think that still persists. I think it definitely persists today in the United States for sure. But yeah, so he's gonna say, the craftsmen don't don't go to plays where there's like the Guardians. Don't go to a play, and don't be an actor who plays the craftsman, who plays the smith. And this is kind of funny. The Guardians can't even copy sounds like the murmurs of rivers. They can't like or the roll of the ocean or thunder. Like I'm being really naughty right now, apparently, according to Plato, right? That seems kind of ridiculous to me, but yeah. Why does he seem to prefer narrative style? He says it's simple, has slight changes. This is another thing about Plato, that he seems to elevate things that are unchanging and simple, not complex and ornate and all this stuff, that those are the best and greatest things, right? And remember we were talking last time about the gods, and he was saying that the gods, they should not be represented as always taking on all these different forms, because why would a god want to change? The gods are perfect. So somebody says, wouldn't Plato prefer documentaries? Yes, I think he would, right? He wouldn't like fiction or what are they called? It's like a documentary where they reenact stuff. He wouldn't like that. Just the documentary footage, just all that sort of stuff. But a mockumentary, no, he wouldn't like the mockumentary. That'd be even worse. I think he would really not like the mockumentary because it is trying to be a documentary or pretending to be a documentary and not. So it's like doubly deceptive. So I think he would really not like that. But back to this notion of narrative style being simple with slight changes, whereas imitative style has all kinds of changes. You'll have a real serious character talking to a real obnoxious character. So all this spastic stuff, whereas a narration is just, and then this happened, and then this happened, and this guy went here, and he did this. It's very just straightforward. Again, this harkens back to what he said about the gods. The gods don't change, he says. They shouldn't be represented as changing. If they're changing, why would they change? They're perfect. They don't need to change from perfection to anything else. They'd be less than perfect. So he thinks permanence, non-transitoriness, not being one way one time and one way another, flipping, your states, that's not good. So, if it's good for the gods, it's good for poetry. So the narrative style is closer to that. Imitative style, as we say, has all sorts. So therefore, the imitative and the mixed, even Homer, they're banished, right? They're out, kicked out of the Republic. Okay. And so this last point, I think we've already talked enough about. If anybody has any comments, you can jump in now, but I think we've had some pretty good comments already, right? So the idea that art imitates life, but also life imitates art. So he's very concerned with, the kind of art that his citizens will be consuming if he's the guy in charge.
This is for like his utopia, right?
Right. This is like the perfect society. Right. He's trying to build the perfect society.
It's kind of like, to me, it's a little bit ironic that it kind of seems like he's basically doing the same thing as like what or like treating people how the people in the Allegory of the Cave were being treated.
Right.
Like,
right.
As prisoners, they don't get to kind of see the real truth of the world, and they're kind of sheltered from it for their own good.
Yeah, that's exactly correct. And so I'm glad you mentioned that. I don't know if I really spent a whole lot of time on this point, but I guess I should do it now. I think a lot of people hear that Allegory of the Cave, and it's very inspiring to a lot of people. It's something that's referenced a lot of places. You'll see it in the media. People will talk about it, and they seem to represent Plato, I think, incorrectly. In a certain sense, yes. Plato encourages us to explore and to try to be as good and wise as possible. And if that means getting out of the cave, great. But there is a very strong elitist streak in Plato. So, like I was saying, I think a lot of people, they use the allegory, they love it, they're inspired by it because they're like, oh, Plato, he wants us to be open-minded and think for ourselves and not just take the shadows that society projects to us and just force feeds us. He wants us to break the chains of ignorance and get out of the cave, and then we go back to save everyone in the cave because we want everybody else to be wise and spread the wisdom, right? And that's really only half the story, because for Plato, not everybody's going to take that journey out of the cave. He actually, so this is the very elitist streak of Plato. He thinks that certain people have certain types of souls. I don't know, did I go over this last time? I feel like I did, but maybe I didn't. So he did, yeah. So the three types, right? You've got the merchant class, the ones whose soul is driven by wealth, and they want to acquire things. They have the appetitive soul, right? The appetitive. They have this strong appetite. All of us have that, but for them, that dominates. They're always going to be stuck down in the cave, okay? All they're going to care about is making money and wealth, and that's material stuff. For Plato, that's not so important. So he thinks if your soul is dominated by that drive, you're not going to be able to be good and just the right way. You have to be lied to. It's sort of it's this notion we talked about last week, the noble lie. It's okay to lie as long as it guides someone towards truth. You know, he says, I think I gave you this example last time. If you let someone borrow, if somebody lets you borrow their weapons, and then they come back a week later and they want their weapons back, but they're in a rage and they want to go kill their neighbors, Plato would say it's actually good to lie to them in that situation. It's a noble lie. You could tell them, hey, I forgot where I put your weapons. I don't remember. And, you're going to give them their weapons back eventually, but you're going to wait till they calm down. Okay. So he would say in that sense, they're lacking reason. They're overcome by their passions. So in that sense, it's okay to lie to them. You guide them towards truth. You guide them towards the good. So these people that all they care about is money, they're not going to do the right thing for the right reason. You have to tell them, oh, just be good and do this because you'll make money off of it, or you'll be wealthy, right? So that might be a lie, but that's the only way you're going to get them to act correctly. Same thing with the guardians. He would say that there may be the guardians are maybe a little bit further out of the cave than those guys, right? They care about honor, they care about being honorable, but they're still not fully out of the cave, right? Only the philosophers are the ones that get out of the cave because all they care about is knowledge, truth, wisdom, just for the sake of itself. And so this is why he justifies them being the rulers. He says, well, because they don't really want the worldly wealth, they don't really care about money, so they're not ruling the populace in order to take advantage of them or to try to make money off of them or to exploit them. They're doing it because they're the ones that know the best way to organize society. And I think you also mentioned that this is the perfect society for Plato. He thinks this is a utopia, but he admits it's just the best possible society for all these types of people. They themselves might not think they're the happiest, but he says they don't know what's best for them. The philosopher does, right? So again, comes off very, very condescending. We're gonna move on. I don't know about how far we're gonna get today, if we're gonna get this far, but there are some selections from the Laws, which is Plato's last book, and I'm not as familiar with that work. But apparently in the Laws, he talks more realistically about what would actually work. The Republic is sort of like, this is the ideal society. This is what it would be like if we could have everything perfect. He knows that most people aren't going to put up with this kind of thing. So you'd have to find some compromise between the rulers and the populace. And so he does work that out in the Laws. But again, it's good that you point this out. This is supposed to be, it's a utopia, right? It's a place that really could never be. Somebody says in the comments, kind of a funny comment here, his perfect society is one where he puts himself on top. Yes, very, very, very true. I kind of feel the same way, though. It's like people always ask me, like, what's your political view? I was like, I'm authoritarian with me in charge, right? You know, make me the dictator, and that's the perfect society, right? He was an aristocrat. Yes, he was an aristocrat. So you say not surprising. Of course. Very good point, though. You might think that's an ad hominem. Like, of course, he's a rich guy. He would think this way. I think for a rich guy, I think you know, you got to give him some credit for being a rich guy. I think he didn't pursue the life of politics. He pursued philosophy and he opened a school. But I think it is a relevant point because I think it makes him a bit naive. I think it makes him a bit, you know, he's an idealist, literally, and kind of in the looser sense that when we talk about people being idealistic today. When we get to Aristotle, I think he's a bit more, I guess, down to earth is a way of putting it, more commonsensical, whereas Plato's sort of like, someone says perfectionist. I'm glad you said that because that was the word I was looking for and I couldn't think of it. Yeah, he seems to be a bit of a perfectionist. So let's see, how are we doing on time here? Okay, so it's only 1 o'clock. Let's wrap up. Let's do the next few slides here where he makes a few comments on music, and then we'll take a break after that and we'll come back for you know, the last bit. We're going to get pretty far here, pretty close to the end of Plato, I think. So for next class, make sure you finish the chapter on Plato and get a good start on Aristotle. I don't know how far we'll get on Aristotle. It'll probably take us the first part of class to wrap up Plato, and we'll just do whatever we can after the break. But let's go ahead, like I said, let's wrap up these next few slides that are on music. So he makes a few more comments on music. And some of the things he wants to censor when it comes to how music is composed. So he breaks music up into, you know, these 3 parts. When you're looking at a song or an ode, it's always got words, a melody, and a rhythm, okay? So for those of you who aren't, like, musical, you don't know the words should be straightforward, right? So I'm trying to think of, like, a really easy song. Like that everybody would know, something I could hum. But man, I don't know. I should have thought ahead and like, oh, happy birthday. Yeah, well, that doesn't have any accompaniment, right? Like it's happy birthday to you. I guess in a way, happy birthday has words. It also has a rhythm. I wouldn't say it has a, well, it is. Is it a melody or a rhythm? You sing it at a cadence, right? Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday. Yeah, there's no, it has all 3, do you think? Well, how do you separate the melody from the rhythm in that? The national anthem. Yeah, but that was even the same because it like, they all go together. It's like, oh, say, can you see? And the music, it's all synchronous. I need to get on YouTube and just like pick a song out. But like the rhythm is sort of like it's the beat, you know, usually the bass guitar. If you're like looking at the typical rock and roll song, it'll be sort of like you know, if it's like rhythm and blues or rock and roll, it'll be you know, that's sort of the rhythm, right? The pace, you might say, okay? And the melody, let's see, I'm trying to think. It's sort of like the accompaniment to the rhythm, right? So the guitar might come in, you got your rhythm here, and then every once in a while the guitar, that's kind of a riff, but it's sort of melodic, okay? So the melody is what accompanies the rhythm. It's sort of, you know, it's almost a voice of the instruments, right? It's a real pretty sort of thing, right? Typically, right? It's supposed to be catchy, it's got a hook, and the rhythm sort of sets the pace, right? And obviously the words are just, you know, the words, right? The lyrics, what's being sung, okay? And so he says that, and this might not be the case, right? He says that 2 and 3 depend largely on the words. So you write the words first, okay? So you'll write, you know, the lyrics to your song, and then after that, you would construct a rhythm to go along with it. This man's mixtape is going to drop hard. Yeah, I don't know. I think Plato's mixtape would be very boring. Okay, we'll get to that in a minute. Like, what kind of music would Plato put on his mixtape? I think it would be nothing but Gregorian chant, and it would be probably battle hymns, like marching songs into battle. Yeah, weird lyre and chanting stuff, basically. Yeah, very boring. It'd just be like, let's go fight in the battle, bum, 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 just like, war hymns, or holy, like a Gregorian chant, basically. Okay, but nothing too sorrowful, right? This is very repetitive, I guess. He's kind of repeating his points here. What he said about imitative art, like comedy and tragedy. No lamentation, no sorrow, so no sad songs, no drinking songs, no softness, right? So nothing like sweet and gentle, like I love you, my sweet little flower. No, none of that wussy stuff. No indolence, right? So no rebellious school's out for summer. None of that. No way. And obviously the gods have to be represented properly, just like they were in the other works of art. So somebody says, I jam to that when gaming. I don't know. Okay, so yeah. So again, I've got my little examples here. You've got, I don't know how people, I mean, this was really huge in the late 90s when I was in high school. And so I don't know if anybody's even heard of Gregorian chant anymore, but these were huge and I never got it. I was like, this stuff is just boring. Maybe it's relaxing, but I mean, I just rather listen to just straight classical music. But this to me seemed like this is what I'm picturing Plato talking about here, right? He's, he mentions, no lamentations, so no Lydian harmonies. I'm not going to get into all these harmonies, all these Greek harmonies, right? There's Ionian, Lydian, Mixolydian, and all this. Music majors might be familiar with this stuff. They actually make you memorize all these, right? They're very similar to your typical Western scale. All they do is they shift the step pattern of intervals. So what is it? It's like whole, half, whole, half is the typical Western scale. It's like a whole, yeah, exactly. It's a major, exactly. There you go. Charles knows it. And all they do, like each of these Greek harmonies, they just what's the word I'm looking for? Transpose the Western scale by one. So I forgot. We actually had an acronym to remember all of them. And so which one? I studied music theory for a couple semesters, and I just couldn't hang, man. I'm just not. I haven't been classically trained, so I was just out of my league. But anyway, so don't worry about all this. You might have been confused in the reading, like what the heck's the Lydian? What's the Ionian? But it seems like he likes the Dorian and the Phrygian. So the Dorian is, the more courageous. This is the marching band type music. And the Phrygian is the more peaceful, holy, moderate. In fact, I've got a passage here. Let's read it. This is on page 24 at the bottom, where he kind of describes what he's talking about, the kind of music that he prefers. So he says, of the harmonies I know nothing, but I want to have one warlike to sound the note or accent which a brave man utters in the hour of danger and stern resolve, right? So dun 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 dun, that kind of stuff. Or when his cause is failing and when he's going to wounds or death, dun, 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 that kind of stuff, right? And at every such crisis, he meets the blows of fortune with a firm step and a determination to endure. So that's the first type. And another to be used by him in times of peace and freedom of action, when there's no pressure of necessity, and he's seeking to persuade God by prayer, right? So a somber, a silent, the Gregorian chant. When he's expressing his willingness to yield to persuasion or entreaty to admonition, and which represents him when by prudent conduct he has attained his end, not carried away by his success, but acting moderately and wisely under the circumstances, and acquiescing in the event. These two harmonies I ask you to leave, the strain of necessity and the strain of freedom. So the strain of necessity, that's sort of the somber, holy music, and the strain of freedom, right? The marching warriors, marching forth to the battle. That's all that's left, right? Those are the only two types of music that he's going to allow to be played in the Republic. Again, I would really not like Plato's mixtape. I like that comment earlier. That's kind of funny though, right? Maybe that could be like an extra credit project. Make me a Plato mixtape, you know, and see what we say. So he says no multiplicity of notes. Again, keep it simple. Like the gods are simple and perfect and whole. They don't have all this extra notes and extra harmonies and, you know, no chords. Somebody said no chords, right? If anybody studied music theory, right, this was kind of the thing. You couldn't have two tones at once during like the early, if you ever take like a art appreciation, music appreciation, they'll talk about medieval music. And, you know, for the longest time, you couldn't sing two notes at the same time. That was considered evil, or it was too, you know, sexy or something like that. And for the longest time, I think even in some whole sacred music, they've completely banished the tritone, right? The inverted 7 interval, because it's considered like the what is it called? The musica in diabolica, or whatever the heck the Latin is. Yeah, the devil's triad, right? Tritones are wacky. Yeah, they sound real weird. They're just like, you know, I think they sound kind of cool. If you use them right in your compositions, I think they sound really interesting, but they're wacky, you know, they're the devil's note, right? This is very Platonic, right? It's very much in the vein, I would say, of Plato. And he really didn't like flutes, apparently. Like, flute is like the most naughty, it's like the naughtiest instrument of all. It was usually associated with women, right? Like these flute girls, they would play flutes at these dinners and banquets and do other things, you know? So it was sort of like, that was like a very seductive sound. It was a very sensual. There's a rumor, though, I don't know who, Plutarch, that when Plato was dying on his deathbed, he actually requested a flute player to come play flute to him. So maybe he was a bit naughty himself. Maybe this is a little projection. I don't know, but interesting anecdote. So back to this notion, he says that those two elements, the rhythm and the harmony, are regulated by the words. So you come up with the words first, and then all the other stuff should be structured around it. I put this is an anti-Kurt Cobain approach to songwriting. I remember I used to be a really big Nirvana fan when I was in high school, or actually even as far back as middle school. I guess, you know, that was when they hit really big, when I was like in 6th grade. And I remember watching interviews with Kurt Cobain. You know, it really broke my heart when he died. And after his death, everybody was looking at his lyrics, and they're like, look, he was leaving messages, and there's all these signs of his suffering and his anguish. But that would kind of annoy me, because I remember, like, in interviews, he would talk about how he would just make the words up. In fact, on their first album, Bleach, he just made he didn't even have lyrics for most of the songs. He would just kind of like change them up a bit every time they played them. And finally, when they recorded the album, he's like, okay, I guess I better write like actual lyrics. So he sat down and wrote the lyrics. And so I guess like that's anti-Plato, right? It's like, and if you're a musician, like especially if you've played in a rock band or something like that, or even I would say hip hop, most hip hop artists, I'm imagining they start with the hook, you know, they start with a rhythm or a beat, then they're gonna add their rap on top of it. Okay, they're gonna add their song on top of it. It's very rare you're gonna have the rhymes and then they're gonna do the rhythm. Okay, but I don't know. I've never produced that kind of music. At least I've never done it myself. But you know, working with an actual band with instruments, it seems like most of the time the songs are kind of written. You just kind of jam out and things kind of come together. And then every once in a while you're like, oh geez, like there's a good chorus, and you throw in a song, and then the lyrics are added later. But that's not, I guess the libretto comes first for Plato. You write the words first, and the melody and the rhythm is supposed to be subordinate to that. So let's see here. Let's look at the other quotes. I gotta try to get to a good stopping point so we can take our break. Let me see how we're doing on time. Oh, I still got like 20 minutes, so I'm not as big of a hurry as I thought I was. But let's look at the rest of these quotes. Beauty of style and harmony and grace and good rhythm depend on simplicity. There it is again, right? You got to keep it simple, no chords, no all this ornamentation. I mean, true simplicity of a right and nobly ordered mind and character, not that other simplicity, which is only a euphemism for folly. Musical training is more potent an instrument than any other because rhythm and harmony find their way in the inward places of the soul. This quote here, actually, let me read the last one real quick and then we'll come back to this. In weaving, embroidery, architecture, and every kind of manufacture, also in nature, animal and vegetable, in all of them is grace or absence of grace. And ugliness and discord and inharmonious motion are nearly allied to ill words and ill nature, as grace and harmony are the twin sisters of goodness and virtue and bear their likeness. So he seems to be saying that like there's a sort of beauty that we find in the arts, which is akin to a beauty that we find in nature. There's a balance, you know, in both. And that going back to that third quote, musical training can mimic this beauty, and it has this very striking effect, as he puts it, on the inward places of our soul. So this is something that you're going to see in all, like, I wouldn't say all these philosophers, but certainly a handful of them. The one that's jumping into my mind is Schopenhauer and Nietzsche. Those are two that both seem to think this about music, that music has something about it. There's something about music that's different from the other arts, that is more potent, that and it's mysterious, some of them say. Plato seems to leave it pretty mysterious here. Who knows what it is? But there's something about music that moves human beings, like just universally, like directly in our soul. What do you think? You think there's something to this? I mean, maybe you're not a big music fan. Maybe there's some students out there that prefer visual art, or they like to watch movies or something like that. Looks like I got some comments in the chat box, so let me open that up. I hate that sentiment, but I love music. So you don't really agree. You're like, I love music, but I don't think it's, necessarily the most, yeah, it's not that mystical, right? So he says, that, I think what he's thinking here is that it's, it affects you more directly. Whereas if you, like, let's say you read a poem, you have to think about the words, and you have to think about what the words mean. And if it's like a more modern poem, it's metaphorical. You have to see, well, what do they symbolize? And so there's all this sort of thought process that goes on. There's all this reasoning and rationalizing that goes on for you to fully appreciate and understand that work of art. Whereas with music, the argument goes that that is not the case. That when you hear a song and it's a good or catchy song or a sad song or a triumphant song, whatever mood it is just directly known. It's directly felt. You don't think, oh, this is a song that's supposed to make me feel sad. Let me think about it. Oh, yes, I am sad now. No, you're just like, oh, man, that's a sad you feel it in your heart. It makes you sad yourself. I think that's kind of what he's trying to say here. So that doesn't necessarily have to be mystical. It's just that it has a psychological effect that is incomparable to other aesthetic experience. Somebody says, I have no comprehension of painting or art, though I'm sure someone would disagree, right? I would disagree, but I understand where you're coming from. That's fine. Like, I don't judge you for that. If some people just aren't that into art. It's okay. I go to museums. I try to enjoy it. It just doesn't do anything for me, right? I feel the same way about sports, right? I try to watch a game on TV, and I just can't get into it. I mean, every once in a while, if it's like a really close game and it's like really exciting with a lot of plays, like, oh, okay, I can watch that. But for the most part, I just can't follow sports, so it's just not for me. But he thinks, music, it hits you right in your soul. So you have to be very careful about the kind of music that you let your citizens listen to, because it's very persuasive, right? It hits those inner recesses of the soul. So let's try to finish this up. How many? Okay, let me just do these two more slides, and then we'll pause for a minute. So more restrictions on art. Okay, so all artists. Okay, these apply to every artist, and again, the word artist is broader than you would probably think. Okay, this would be architects, sculptors, painters, and maybe even craftsmen. I'm not so sure about that, but maybe even craftsmen. Um, the man who has the spirit of harmony, right? If you have a good soul that's in harmony, that will be most in love with the loveliest. Okay, so if you have a good soul, you're going to love good things, I suppose. You're going to love lovely things. But he will not love him who is of an inharmonious soul. Okay, so birds of a feather flock together. Pleasure deprives man of the use of his faculties quite as much as pain. There is no keener pleasure than sensual nor matter. Okay, so because art can affect us in these very sensual ways and affect our soul in these very direct ways, we have to be very careful of it. Okay, when we talk about love, though, what he thinks of, this is sort of the Platonic conception of love. Is true love is love of beauty and order. Okay, more on beauty later. We might actually have to hold off until next class to get really specific about what Plato has to say about beauty. You know, what is beauty? What is beauty itself? That's really close to the end of the chapter. But when we really love something for Plato, true love, not false love, not the delusional love, but a true philosophical love. It's a love of the harmonious. It's a love of the true beauty and order. It's temperate. It's balanced. It's not sensual. It's not of the material. So when he speaks of beauty, this is something that I always had problems with Plato. I don't really know what he's talking about. Okay, when I'm thinking of something beautiful, I'm always thinking of something through my senses. So a beautiful melody that I hear, a beautiful sunset, a scene from nature, a beautiful work of art that I see on a museum wall or a sculpture. He's talking about it's just beautiful intellectually. Not because of the way it's organized, not because of the way it looks, but because it is just orderly and correct. Maybe a mathematical beauty. I had a friend, my friend Elia, she was a math major. She got her master's degree in mathematics. She had some professors that one time they told her that they wanted to frame her exam because they thought it was a work of art. They loved the way she set up all of her problems and her equations. They were so organized. I don't see that beauty. So maybe I think this is kind of what Plato has in mind. It's a non-visual beauty. It's a it's a sort of, somebody says this is more of a Pythagorean approach. Yes, if you know Pythagoras, I think that Plato is definitely deeply influenced by Pythagoras and the Pythagoreans. So they thought that this material world, was just, illusory, and there's this higher realm that could be understood through mathematics. Yes, I think that was a big, deep influence on Plato, right? Somebody said, LOL nerds. Yes, that's how, maybe I'm not nerdy enough. I just don't get it, right? This beauty, this mathematical beauty, is just, it expresses truth in such a simple way, such complex truth in such a simple equation. I don't see it. It's just interesting. Someone's like, yeah, I agree. It's not for me. Matter and temperate pleasure should come nowhere near the lover and his beloved if their love is to be the right sort. So this is the classic Platonic love. If you love somebody, you don't want to get busy with them. You don't want to have sex with them. You just you love their soul. You just want to have a philosophical conversation with them. That's true love for Plato, right? Okay, one last slide, and then we'll take a quick break. So as we said, imitative art is banished from the state according to Plato. And this rule, I think, is especially important when we get to the section on Phaedrus, which I don't think we're going to have time for today. We'll probably have to do that tomorrow. Plato talks about the different parts of the soul and how art affects different parts of our soul. So that's a lot of stuff. We should probably wait till later for that. Someone's like, math is pretty cool. Yeah, it is. I'm not dissing math. I'm just saying I'm not I don't appreciate it on that deep a level. So maybe it's my shortcoming, right? But in general, right, just to sort of wrap things up before we go on our break, he thinks all poetical imitations are ruinous. They're detrimental to the understanding of the people who hear them. They push us further away from reality, push us further away from truth. Push us further away from the knowledge of the true nature of the things that they're imitating. So Now, we're going to have to get at what exactly is imitation, and this is going to get pretty metaphysical. So we're going to start talking about Plato's forms here in just a moment. But this is a really good place, I think, to stop. Let's see. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Let's see. It's 1:20. What do you guys think? You want to do the same thing we did last time and just break for like 15 minutes? We can come back at like 1:35. Or do you want to take a full 30 minutes? What do you think? 10, 15? I got a bunch of 15s. I got 1:30. I got a 20, 15, 20, 15, 15. Okay, like it looks like 15 is kind of winning out. There was 1:30 and there was like 2 or 3 20s. Let's go for like a very generous 15 minutes, okay? So, let's say 35 after, but probably a little bit later than that. Anybody have any last minute comments before I hit pause on the recording? Anything, questions, comments? Okay, it doesn't look like it. So I'm gonna hit pause the recording here. I'm gonna share the screen. And let's get back to where we left off. This is not where we left off, so let me back up here. We're gonna start talking, we're gonna elaborate a bit more on this notion of imitation. And I don't know how far we're going to get in this. As long as we talk about Plato's forms and kind of elaborate on that, I will be happy. But I need to keep track of time here. I don't want to keep you guys too late. I know we stayed almost to the end last time, so I feel almost like I need to let you go a little early today. But I want to, like I said, I want to at least get through all this stuff about forms. Okay, this is where we left off, I think. Okay, here's where we left off. So again, he's going to elaborate a bit more on imitation, and he starts with this quote here. Maybe starts off really confusing and gets even more confusing. If you've taken a class in philosophy before, if you're familiar with Plato, maybe not. Maybe it wasn't that confusing if you're familiar with the forms. But let's go through it, and hopefully I can help you all out if you're in the dark, and we'll figure this out. So Plato writes in the Republic, he says, whenever a number of individuals have a common name, we assume them to have a corresponding idea or form. So, usually when I'm in the classroom teaching Plato, especially this part, I'll point to all the desks in the classroom and I'll say, okay, so, you have, like he says, there's a number of individuals here that have a common name, right? Desk, 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 desk. All these desks in the classroom. Why do I use that one name to refer to all these individual things? Well, for Plato, that means that when I use the word desk, and when you use the word desk, and when we all use the word desk, we all have the same idea in mind, right? We all know what we're thinking. We all know what we're talking about. That's why we use the word desk, and again, if it's, some other culture or some other language, it'll be a different word. But if it was French or German or Spanish, the word would be associated with a concept or an idea, which we would all share. We would all share that idea, okay? So this is where he's going with this. I have in parentheses here. Is this a reasonable assumption? Maybe, maybe not. I have Wittgenstein in parentheses there. He's an Austrian philosopher who he comes up with this notion of family resemblance. Anybody familiar with Wittgenstein? I know there's a few of you that have taken philosophy before. You'd be surprised if you've studied Wittgenstein. But what do you think about this? This claim that, okay, so we're using the same name, like the word desk, to apply to all these different individuals, all these actual objects that are desks. Is it safe? Is it good? Is it smart? Is it correct to assume that that there's a corresponding idea then to what we're talking about?
I think that
Go ahead.
If it's like a desk, right? Maybe we have an idea of what a desk is, but everybody thinks of like it in a different way. Like I could think of like a black desk and you might think of like a brown desk.
Right.
Or like we know that it is a desk, but it doesn't have like, I guess, like a one true form.
Good. Well, for Plato, it does. He's gonna say,
Yeah.
yeah. For Plato, he's gonna say, look, there's this one true form. I like the way you put it, one true form. And what he would say to your response probably would be like, you're on the right track, but wrong. Yes, he'll admit, look, yeah, when you picture a desk, maybe like let's say to use maybe cat is a better example, right?
Yeah, that's one my other philosophy professor used.
Yeah, so cat would maybe be a better one because you could think of like maybe you have a cat or you had a cat growing up or or you don't have any cats, so the only cat are cartoon cats or the cat on the Nine Lives commercial. So the concept of cat to you is going to have different associations than some other cat, person, right? But somebody's saying, what about all the different breeds of cat? Good, you've got but Plato, what he's going to say is that all these differences are unimportant, that there's some true form or essence of catness. I hate to use that word because like that, what's that movie? Isn't it Hunger Games where there's a character named Katniss or whatever? But like the quality of being a cat, the form of being a cat. You mentioned, you might think of a black desk, somebody might think of a brown desk. We usually say, well, the color of the desk isn't important, right? So that's not a part of its form. It doesn't matter if it's brown or it's black. So also, somebody, Hassan said, well, what about different breeds of cat? Well, Plato might say, well, it doesn't matter if it's a Siamese cat or a tabby cat or a calico cat. That doesn't matter. Like, what is it about it that makes it a cat? It doesn't matter what breed it is. There's something about it that makes it a cat. So that's the idea. That's the form. But Wittgenstein, the one I have mentioned here in the slide, he's an Austrian philosopher, 20th century. He has this notion, and he really focused more on language than he did on metaphysics. Plato is going to be making a metaphysical point about this. Plato's going to claim that there are such things as forms. There are these ideas. So, what you were saying, the perfect form of cat, it does exist, and it is an idea, but it's what all these other cats are imperfect versions of that ideal. Okay, so, and one of Plato's arguments for this is the way we use language. We use the word cat, we use the word desk, we use the word bottle, we use all these words to refer to all these separate things, and it works. Like, by golly, it works. Like when I say go sit in your desk, if I'm, the disciplinarian and you're a good student, or maybe a bad student that needs to go sit down, you go sit down. You know what I mean, whether you comply or not, that might be, but you know what the word desk means. So he says, well, if you know what it means, then there must be something that we know. There must be such a thing as a desk, whatever it is to be a desk. So regardless of whether you picture a brown desk, a black desk, or whatever desk, there is this perfect desk, the form of desk, I guess you could say. But again, back to Wittgenstein, he's going to say no way, right? He wasn't focused on metaphysics. Wittgenstein was more of like a philosopher of language. So he was looking at theories of language and trying to explain language. And for him, you really couldn't come up with this perfect definition of anything. Like if you tried to define some term, famously Wittgenstein uses the example of game. And in German, it's even harder to define that word game. But, the word is Spiel, and the word Spiel has even broader connotations, I think, than the English word game. But just, let's just try to keep it simple. I don't think there's any German speakers in here, but if you try to come up with a definition, like the perfect definition of the word game, so that every game fit that definition, and every time you use the word game, that's what you meant, essentially. Is there any way you could do that? How would you define it? I mean, I'm looking at some of the comments here. Someone says it's impossible. Wittgenstein agrees. He tries to do it just to demonstrate. He says, well, let's You know, so he takes a stab at it. He says, well, let's say that game means, you know, anytime you use the word game, you're talking about some activity that involves competition and a winner, and there's always rules. You know, that's a decent, I guess, definition of the word game. But can you think of other uses of the word game where that wouldn't work?
Like food, kind of like big
Oh,
game.
good. Yeah, so if you're a hunter, is that what you mean? Like you're hunting for game?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one, right? Hunting. What about like in more like a slang, like more loose? Like what would if like, hey, that guy's got good game, or you got good
Like you're
game?
good at picking up like people or whatever.
Yeah,
Like
like you're good. Yeah, you're good. Yeah, you're good with women or whatever. Or sometimes I hear women say, "I don't want a guy that played games with me," right?
right.
You know, they don't want somebody to take advantage of them or manipulate. Yeah, that somebody said it, take advantage, right? So the word game has all these connotations. So Wittgenstein says, no, there's no form of desk. There's no form of game. Yeah, but what there is in all these different uses, every time you see the word used in these different contexts, it's the context that will help you understand what it means. But he'll admit, sure, there are what he calls family resemblances. So that's part of his theory of language, is that words have family. The use of the word game has a family resemblance to the use of the word game in other contexts. And so we have to be aware of, you know, what the context is. It has a lot to do with cultural things. Somebody said, you know, word has multiple meanings. Does this connect to the idea of imitation? I don't know, maybe, but I think Wittgenstein would be careful about this. Plato thinks it does. So Plato is going to say that basically when we say the word in a certain sense, we have the idea in our mind. So the true desk, we use the word to refer to the actual physical desk. But for him, that itself is an imitation of the idea. The idea is the real true thing. The utterance of it in language, the physical manifestation of it in an object, those are actually the imitation. So when a carpenter imitates, when a carpenter makes a desk, he's imitating, he's using that idea, that ideal form, whatever the perfect desk would be, and he's trying to make the best desk he can. He's trying to make it as close to that, if he's a good carpenter, right? So that's the idea, right? The ideal archetype, the Platonic form of desk or cat or whatever, it's what all good things are aiming to be. A good desk is that's close, it's a good copy of that perfect idea, right? So here's the quote. He's talking about tables and beds, right? He says, there are beds and tables in the world, but there are only two ideas or forms of them. So there's only one bed idea, he thinks. So every carpenter that's making a bed, they always have to make it to where you can lay in it. They always have to make it to where you can sleep in it. They always have to make it to where you can fit yourself in it, right? These are, no matter what kind of bed you're making, whether it's a water bed or with a mattress. Who uses water beds anymore? But you get the point, right? You've got the number bed, pick a number bed, whatever the heck, those adjustable beds, okay? But, you know, whenever you're making a bed, regardless of what type of bed it is, there's a sort of basic outline that you need, the necessary features to be a good bed. And so, and there's only one, he says. Again, there's only one idea. And all the beds in the world are copies of it, okay? So there are two forms, the idea of the bed, the idea of the table, and the maker of them makes a bed, or he makes a table for use in accordance with the idea. But no artificer makes the ideas themselves. How could he? Okay, so the carpenter didn't come up with the idea of a bed. You know, you might think, well, somebody did, like a long time ago. You know, before there were beds, it probably really sucked, and some guy figured out, or woman figured out, you know, how to make a comfortable place to sleep. And maybe it evolved over time. You know, maybe it was just they got a bunch of said, no, we just didn't sleep, somebody says, right? Yeah, but the idea is that this notion evolved over time. And Plato might argue that even if that's the case, like, let's just say that what we call beds now have developed over time. So first there was just gathering a bunch of leaves and stuff and branches and that were soft enough and making a big pile of them. And then we learned how to make threads and needles, and so we made actual cloth. Okay, and so there's this like evolution, you might say, of like bed. But what Plato would argue is, even if that's true historically, all of these iterations of beds were aiming towards the idea. They were all trying to be the perfect bed. They all fell short, but he would say, so there's something that's guiding the maker. Whoever's making the bed is guided by a standard that's just there. It's just there. You know, you need the bed for sleep, of course, that's the function of the bed. But once that function is established, then it's just true that it has to be long enough to sleep in, right? If it's too short, you won't be able to spread out on it. You know, all these things are necessary. And so that notion is not, you don't get to decide what that standard is. It's not just a matter of opinion. It's just objectively true that all beds need to have these features. This is what Plato's getting at. So there's a form for all of these things that are made, a form of desk, form of table, form of chair. Hassan says, the bed makers are not guided by the perfect bed, they're guided by perfect comfort. Well, he would say that perfect comfort would be a broader category. So maybe like the perfect comfort is something that the bed is aiming at, but it's also something that the chair is aiming at. It has to be, and I guess a chair would be slightly different. You wouldn't want the chair to be too comfortable, because if the chair was too comfortable, you might fall asleep in it. You know, normally you sit up in a chair because you want to be at your desk and awake. So maybe you want to make it slightly comfortable, but not as comfortable as the bed. So maybe there's a proper amount of comfortableness to the bed. So let me see. I'm getting a lot of comments here. So let me pause a minute and see. I've got some questions. How can you prove a true ideal exists if no one's ever reached it? Good. That's a really good question. Okay. So for Plato, he's got a few arguments for this. You know, he seems to think that we actually have these ideals already in our soul, that our mind has them in us. We're born innately with an understanding, so that we just intuitively, when we see something beautiful, we just know it's beautiful, even though we can't quite explain it. It takes philosophy, it takes, you know, rationality and reasoning and discussing it to arrive at a good account of this. But he really believes that our soul, once it sort of is exposed to certain things, it just knows. It just sort of sees beauty. You know, it knows if a bed's comfortable or not. And so, you know, one of the arguments he makes for this is, you know, we all know what equal is, don't we? We know that 2 equals 2, and 2 plus 2 equals 4, and 1 equals 1. But where do we see equality? Do we ever experience equality? Do we ever notice equality, like strict, actual equality, where something is absolutely equal to something else? And you might say, well, I've got this pen right here, and I've got this pen right here. Aren't they equal? They're shaped the same. They weigh the same. They're equal. Shut up, Plato. I've seen the equal in my experience. I don't need some idea that's hardwired in me. But he would say, these aren't really equal. I'm sure if you weighed them, they wouldn't be exactly the same weight. They're not exactly the same. Maybe this one has a scratch on it that's microscopic and I can't see it. They look the same. They appear to be the same. There's that distinction in Plato, appearance versus reality. It appears to be real. They appear to be equal, but they're not truly equal. But yet I understand what the word equal means. I know what you mean when you say equal. Even though I've never seen anything that was actually equal, things are always different. There's this pen and there's this pen. They can be as close to equal as you can say, but they're still different things. This is this thing and this is that thing. So he's like, where did I get the notion of equal from? I know what it means. It was just there. It was in my soul. It was in my mind. I just have an understanding of equality. Even though it doesn't exist in the physical universe, nothing is strictly equal to something else. And so that's sort of Plato's, well, part of his argument. I've got a lot of comments here, so I'm stirring up the crowd. I like this. let's see what people are saying. So I probably have a bunch of questions I got to respond to. Okay, I already responded to Charles there. Can we prove the ideal exists? He thinks you can. He thinks you do just through your understanding. Now, I don't think he does. I'm not saying that's a knockdown argument. Wittgenstein would say you really don't have a notion of equality. You have a very fuzzy word that you use that's very approximate. It's just super approximate. It's not that precise. Language is not as precise as Plato makes it out to be, right? It's very approximate. So Andrew asks, does each form serve a specific purpose? And anything that serves that purpose is considered an imitation of that form? You know, I'm not sure how to answer that. It seems like certainly a desk has a purpose, and a table has a purpose. But when we get to some higher forms like beauty and goodness, I think that he would say those aren't beautiful for something or good for something, for some purpose, that they're just good in themselves. I mean, you might be able to use beauty for a certain purpose, but that's not what makes it beautiful. So I'm not sure I would just say that unequivocally. That's kind of how Aristotle approaches form. He treats that word differently when he talks about form. When Aristotle talks about form, it's pretty much synonymous with function or purpose. The form of desk is just what do you use a desk for? You sit in it and you write in it. But for Plato, it seems to be this very more abstract, independent thing. It's just the quality of being a desk, the quality of being a bed. And that gets to me very hazy and vague, So I love Plato and I love reading him, but this is, I know this is a hard pill to swallow for some people, and I can see why. I'm certainly not a Platonist, and most philosophers aren't, right? There's some mathematicians I know who they believe that numbers are like Platonic forms, that numbers and the truth about mathematics exists separate from the material realm, and that they're eternal truths. So you do find some Platonists amongst mathematicians occasionally, but this theory is definitely not as popular as it was back in his heyday. So that's why he feels there's an objectivity in art. Correct, right. That's why he would assume that there's just a beautiful, and art is either beautiful or not. I could never agree with Plato. Yeah, I couldn't either, right? I love reading his work. I think he's a fascinating philosopher, writer, but yeah, definitely not a Platonist. They're equal in all the aspects that matter. So Eduardo's talking about when I was talking about equal. Yeah, but they're not strictly equal. And we understand the concept of equality, mathematical equality, even though mathematical equality doesn't really strictly exist in the universe. Nothing is absolutely equal to something else, right?
I get that, but I believe that humans never, there's like a big difference between how humans use the word equal colloquially and how it means in mathematics.
Right.
So I think something that maybe it was Wittgenstein, that's who was saying about the pens, right? Or about
right. Yeah.
Equal.
Well, yeah, for Wittgenstein, he'd say it depends on, like you said, the context matters, right? So if I say equal and I'm talking in politics, and I'm like a politician, equalities, you're talking about equal rights, civil liberties and things like that. Yeah. Whereas obviously in mathematics, it'd be a very strict, abstract sort of equality. But I would say Plato would probably say that when we use the word equal in those other senses you're talking about, the more loose colloquial senses, that those are derivative of the mathematical equality, right? That those are less strict, but proper, true equality, the equal itself would always be that strict mathematical equality. So,
all right, sure, I would agree with that.
So I mean, again, he's an idealist in the metaphysical sense of the word, and also in that looser sense of the word, right? We were talking about how he's an idealist earlier, and he wants the perfect society. He's an idealist, but he's also an idealist in a metaphysical sense. He thinks that all of our reality, the physical world, is based on the ideas. It's based on the non-physical, which kind of makes sense a little bit. You can see how this works when he's talking about tables and chairs, he's going to say the idea is what caused the thing. And it seems to me no, the thing causes the idea. You see a thing and you come up with a concept, to try to simplify it, right? You You know, maybe your whole life you keep bumping into these furry things with waggy tails. And, you know, the first time, you know, they invented the word dog, right? Those things are called dogs, right? So the idea of dog, the concept of dog came after the actual dogs. But he would say, no, the idea is first, it's eternal, it's unchanging, it's always been there, and every dog sort of is derivative of it. Every table is derivative of the idea of table. That's, to me, a hard pill to swallow, but I can kind of see like this idea that if somebody's making something, if you're a builder, if you're building a table, you have to have a conception, a sort of blueprint, a sort of guide, you know, whether you write it down or not, but you've got something in your mind that you want to make, and then you make it. Then it becomes reified, to use that fancy word, right? Something that's mental and an idea becomes physical, it becomes reified. So I can kind of see this, but it seems like his this framework falls apart when we look at things like I mentioned dogs and what about trees? Those are copies of an idea. Those were derived from an idea. The idea caused the tree. The idea of the perfect tree caused all the trees. Like, how does an idea? I can see how the idea of a table could cause a table. Right, the idea of a table. But what were you gonna say?
I would disagree. I don't think the idea of a table causes a table. I think the goals of putting something on another thing, like you have a goal in mind, right? Like you want to put something in an area to like declutter your room or whatever. You know,
Right.
I don't know how to use tables in like ancient Greece, but like you have the idea of goals you want to achieve, and I think it's only like coincidental that the table was created. Like it could have been a stool that was created. Like I don't think there's an idea
Right.
of the table. There's just goals about what you want to do that create the table.
Good. So I think you're sounding a lot more like Aristotle. So that's the idea, is that so there was a what Aristotle would call the final cause, and even though he calls it the final cause, it's really like the initial. It's what gets the ball rolling. And for him, the final cause of something is, why are you making it? Like, what's the purpose? So, like you said, maybe you have clutter, you are disorganized, and you're like, what can I do to fix this problem? And lo and behold, all these materials sort of jump out at you, and you're like, that's a very smooth surface. And that's also these sticks and these poles are heavy, and they would actually, I could put this smooth surface on top of them, and I could organize. So, like you said, there's a goal, and the work itself, like the idea, the structure of the table, how it's designed, how it's organized, that is all subservient to the project, or sort of the end goal of the project, right? So that's sort of what Aristotle would say. But no, for Plato, there's, you know, whether or not there are aims, whether or not there are purposes, there's always going to be an idea of what the perfect table is, or what the perfect chair is, or what beauty is. Right? I know this is not winning over many converts.
There's no way I'm ever swallowing that pill.
Yeah, I realize I'm not going to win many converts to Plato, and that's definitely not my intention. But you also have to understand, too, somebody was talking earlier about how he was a aristocrat, he was rich. You got to think about it this way. I think Aristotle, you know, he might be a little bit more practical and make more sense to a lot of you, but that's because the guy was a physician. He had to work physically with people who were sick. He had to experiment. And so he was more in what you would call empirical. He used his senses to try to learn things, and he would learn from his mistakes, and he would learn from his errors in the past, and he would apply. But for Plato, he sort of seems to think that that is not the right way to go, that your senses will deceive you. You have to go with your intellect, because the world that we see is the world of change. It's a moving target. There's no eternal truth to be found in it. So I think that someone was mentioning earlier, again, how he's rich, he's aristocrat. That has a lot to do, I think, with his outlook, his ability to see the world in this way. Oh, no. We've got to explain it to where it makes sense and it's all orderly. I think it leads him to these very drastic conclusions, very extreme conclusions, with this goal of order and making sense in mind, and not taking into account the very contextual nature of things, right? That's where Aristotle comes in, right? The desk is made for an occasion, and what is good for the desk is based upon what's good for that occasion, right? And so it's all I hate to keep throwing all these terms at you, but it's all teleological. I'll type that in the chat box. Don't worry about it today because we're going to go over it again when we get to Aristotle. But a telos is an aim in Greek, or aim, an end, a purpose, a goal. And for Aristotle, he's always going to frame things in terms of a telos. You can't understand anything unless you understand why it's there. What is its purpose? What is its aim? And according to him, everything has one. That might be questionable. But so let me spell this. I'm going to make sure I spell it right. Teleological, right? Or teleology. Andrew wrote something. The need arises to place something down and be held up by something, so a table solves that need, thus creating a form. Right, that's a very Aristotelian way of understanding it, right? Plato seems to have it backwards, right? There's a concept, there's an idea that's innate in us, and we organize things we're guided by that idea. I think it can go both ways, but to me, I'm more with Aristotle. I would agree it's probably more likely that the very first table that was ever made was probably like that. It was, like Andrew says, there was a need that arose, there were materials around that seemed appropriate, and it worked, right? It probably wasn't the best table, and it got better through time. And that's where I think Plato's getting confused. I think after a while, they develop what's the word I'm looking for? A technique or a standard. Okay, there's a standard way of making tables. There's a standard size of bolt, and it becomes standardized. And once it's standardized, then yes, most of the carpenters are guided by those standards. Most of the craftsmen are guided by those standards. But I'm sort of with Aristotle and Andrew, and it seems like Hassan is sympathetic to this too. That I think it starts off where you're just trying to deal with stuff, you deal with it, and you're like, that worked, that was a good tool, let's refine it. And it kind of, it's more like that. I'm looking at the comments here. I'm getting a lot of good comments, so we're kind of getting stuck here. It looks like we're not going to get this far today. But let's see what else we got up here. Okay, whoa, I need to scroll up because this just keeps going. I agree. Plato seems to believe that all things are archetypes embedded. Well, I don't know about the collective psyche thing. You're sort of using like Jungian language. He did seem to think that these forms were independent. So it's not like the form of the beautiful, the form of desk, the form of table. They don't exist in our mind. They're somewhere else. They're in a higher realm of existence. They're beyond the material and the material realm. So I'm not sure that Plato would be completely on board with Carl Jung and this notion of a collective unconscious. But I think he would agree about the archetypes, that there are these archetypes, these types, these perfect ideals that all humans understand. We're able to tap into these with our understanding. Okay, let's see what else I got. Does this go back to the painting of Plato pointing up and Aristotle pointing down to earth? Okay, yeah. Gerardo's mentioning there's a famous painting of it's called the School of Athens. You might write that down and look it up. It's by Raphael, and it has all these Greek philosophers and Italian scientists. Okay, and in the very center, it's got Plato and Aristotle walking into the center of this big rotunda. This it's supposed to be the academy, Plato's school, and it shows Plato with his fingers pointing up, and Aristotle has his hand level to the ground. And Raphael, obviously he knows his philosophy. He's using this as symbolism. Okay, in fact, all of the figures in the painting have some symbolism associated with them. But why is Plato pointed up? He's, again, the idealist. It's the higher realm of forms, the non-physical. That's where truth is located. That's where being, where real existence is located. This physical world is changing. It's impermanent. It's not the absolute. It's the ideals. And Aristotle's like, bro, let's bring it down to earth here, man. This world exists. The physical is real. So, yeah, good I guess, comment, right? So if you're not familiar with that painting, I think I actually might have it on my Aristotle slide because I make this comparison myself. Obviously, Plato's the idealist and Aristotle's more the empiricist, right? He's willing to look through the senses for truth. Does this play into his beliefs in a religious sense? Yes. In fact, now you're bringing me back to the question that set all of this off. And maybe that's going to give away the answer. But I was asking, how does this model work? Even if I allow, let's say I don't argue against him and I don't bring up Wittgenstein and I say, look, okay, the carpenter, he knows the idea of a good table. And he's using the perfect form. He understands the perfect form, and that's how he makes the table. But how do you explain trees? How does the idea of a tree cause an actual tree? There's got to be some middle person, or obviously the carpenter has to make the table. There's this conduit between the idea and the thing. So if the trees or dogs or humans are caused by the idea, what is it that makes them? How do we explain that in Plato's theology or philosophy? What or who made the tree? Let's see if anybody has any guesses here. The gods? Yeah, Kellen said the gods. Yes. And in fact, you could probably scratch that S at the end because it seems like if you read Timaeus, that Plato was a monotheist to a certain extent. It's controversial. It's not very clear because he wrote a lot about the Greek gods and all the different gods. But if you read the Timaeus, it seems like he's saying there must be this ultimate mind, this perfect mind that's one and unified and perfect and unchanging, and that this mind understood all the perfect forms. And so when the world was created, this mind was able to guide creation and was able to make things as good as they could be. And this also, and somebody was asking, does this tie into his religious beliefs? I hope that slightly answers your question. Yes, so he thinks that this world is an imperfect copy of this higher ideal world, this world of forms. And there must be a mind that you, for lack of a better word, we'll call God. There must be God, this perfect mind, this perfect being, not physical, no body, completely immaterial, that somehow guided all creation. And so this makes him an idealist in another sense. He thinks that everything that happens, however horrible it might seem, however horrible it might look, is actually good. That if we could step back and see the universe as it is, it must be good because God, made it that way. He made the trees that way. That tree looks like it's sick and it's falling apart. Well, it had to die to feed the other trees or some other purpose. We can't comprehend it. But if we do philosophy, we're supposed to arrive at some account of reality that explains it in terms of the good. That it's good, that it should have happened this way because it was all, derived from this perfect source. Okay, so I'm moving on to the next slide, but I'm not going to say anything yet because I still have a lot of comments here to respond to. Let me see how we're doing for time. It's already 2:15, so, geez, we might not get very far here in the slideshow. I might just sort of, let me see where these comments take me, and we might have to just sort of, I'm going to try to end today a little early, like I said, to make up for last week. I'm going to try to end at 2:30, so like I said, 15 minutes. We'll see where this takes us. I've got a bunch of comments here. Somebody mentions the demiurge. Good, you've probably read Timaeus, or you've heard of it. The demiurge is the middleman, right? So God is the mind, and he understands the forms. The demiurge is what creates the world, because God is, remember how, I said earlier, Plato said working with your hands and doing stuff kind of demotes you. I guess God, like doing anything and moving anything, demotes him. So we have to have this demiurge that is guided by God, is sort of like told by God or revealed to God how to create things. So God did not create the universe, but he was sort of like, I guess, the boss. He was the foreman, I guess is a good way to put it. He told the person, the deity that did order it, how to do it. Somebody says, so we cannot access the hyper-Uranian, but only God can. Yeah, only God can access, I suppose, well, this is also controversial too. This is something that it depends on how you read Plato, but he seems to think that there is a possibility, at least there's some evidence for this, there's some possibility that we could come to know the forms fully, but we can't do it right now. There's one thing that's really getting in the way of us being able to see truth and see the absolute truth about reality. And it sort of goes back to that allegory of the cave, right? The people in the cave can't look behind them, so they don't know they're looking at shadows. And you can't really understand you're in the cave till you get out of the cave. But what does all this stuff represent for Plato? That lower realm in that story, if you look at the allegory, the cave and the prisoners, for Plato, you can understand that that's the physical realm. That's the material realm. Once you crawl up the stairs and get to the surface, that's the non-physical, the intellectual, the spiritual realm, the world of forms. So for him, there's really no way that we mortals can have access fully. We can use our intellect, we can use our soul through philosophy to try to understand this higher realm, and we can get glimpses of it. But really, we can't ever see it fully in the state that we're in right now. Why not, do you think? What is wrong about our state currently? The state that I'm in right now at this moment. No matter how good of a philosopher I am for Plato, I'm never going to be able to understand the forms fully. Why? What's getting in the way of this? Who's taken Plato before and might have an idea of what the deal is? What's getting in the way? Yeah, well, it's not that somebody says, are we still stuck in the cave? It's not human limitations, but what is it about us? What limits us? What are those human limitations? Temptations, right. But what tempts us? Why do we have temptations? Food, sex. Would we have any of those things if we, like, let's say we didn't have any hormones? Would we get horny? If we didn't have like any sort of physical, like if we didn't have a body, right? Let's say, if we were just a mind floating around, would we have these temptations? Plato doesn't seem to think so, right? So as long as we're in a physical form, okay, we're always going to be tempted by something physical. We're always going to be drawn towards something in the physical realm because we can't help it. We're at some point, no matter how much we try to read our Plato and study metaphysics and just contemplate the truth of beauty and the truth of the good and the truth of the forms, we're always going to end up getting sleepy at some point, have to take a nap. We're always going to end up getting hungry at some point and go get a snack. Or worse, we'll be reading our book and, some attractive person, and we're going to, oh man, check her out. We're going to get horny. Our body is going to get in the way. Okay. And not to mention also things like optical illusions and seeing things, distorted in the way our senses can deceive us. And so Plato seemed to not trust the senses. He seemed to not trust the body, the physical presence. So as long as we're living here and now, we're not going to really have access to these ideas. It's not till we die and our soul is released from our body that we can have full access to the truth. And I don't know if he would go, just to sort of circle back to the comment that set me off here, I don't know that he would say that we can know as much as God or more than God, but we can approximate that maybe if we escape the body, that we can be God-like and that we can have a direct understanding of the forms in the way that this perfect mind would, or at least as close as our soul could stand, I suppose, right? Okay, there's a lot of comments that I gotta respond to here, so let me pause a bit. I gotta scroll back up because I missed a few. Let's see. Are all the forms good? Is there a perfect ideal of the atomic bomb? Those are great questions. The first question, yes. All forms are good, Plato would say. Well, then this doesn't really make sense though, because he seems to think that everything, like the original argument that we looked at was, well, all these individuals have the same name, right? I've got pen, right? I've got these two pens. Why did my video go? Oh no, but hold on. Let me stop sharing here. See what the deal is. I guess I should just go keeping my video. Okay, so I've got this pen, and they're both a pen. So there must be a form of pen. And there's this desk and that desk. So there must be a form that they all agree on. And there's this beautiful thing and this other beautiful thing. And when we talk about beautiful things, it seems like we understand what we're talking about. So there must be such a thing as the beautiful. Beauty must exist. So what about badness? There's bad things. That was a bad movie. It was a bad dinner. I had a bad time at the party. So isn't there a form of bad? Plato denies that. He says there are no bad forms. So then how does he explain bad things? Anybody have any clue about that? Maybe I'll have to look in the comments to see. Some people are shy. Anybody got an answer?
I kind of think that, like, I was going to say that, like, there are good, like, quote unquote good things for, like, bad. No, there are good forms for, like, bad things. Like, the perfect, like, murder or whatever.
Oh,
like, yeah, morally murder.
That's a great guess. That's a good guess, but that's not where he goes with it. But good guess. I think he would not like that, actually. He'd be like, no, like, that's
Really?
no. That's a very good guess, though. But yeah, no, that's not really his answer. Let me see if anybody else has another. No. So for him, nobody else has a clue. How does he explain bad? Yeah, I think you're kind of saying what the gentleman just said, bad for good reasons. No, it's not like you're really good at being bad or you're really good at being a murder. No. The way he deals with it is that, like, let's say you have a bad desk, for instance, or it's a bad meal or a bad movie or something. What that means for him is that movie, that desk, that meal, that table, whatever, is further removed from the perfect form, okay? So if it's a good desk, it somehow resembles, it looks like, or is similar to, I hate to say looks like because that's too visual for Plato, right? But a good desk is as close to like the form of desk as possible. So if I make a really good desk, it's like really sturdy, really stable, made with good materials. It's a very good desk. It's as close to the idea of desk as I could get, you know. But let's say I go up to the desk and I kick it around a bit and I break one of the legs and I make it all wobbly. And so now it's not a good desk. It's still a desk, so it still resembles that form a little bit, but it resembles it less. It's further removed from the true form, and it's further removed. Someone said a bad imitation. Yes, that's a good way of putting it. It's a very bad imitation. And so it's even further removed from truth, it's even further removed from the good, and it's even further removed from the real. He seems to equate all of those things. That's another thing that might be kind of counterintuitive to some people, that things that are beautiful, that are good, and that are true, that's the same. It's the same thing. And so if something actually happened and it's true, it should have happened that way. And if you don't think so, you must misunderstand it, or you just don't see the full picture or something like that. So that I guess is a response, right? Is there a form for bad? No. All the forms are good. Excuse me, bad things, just they are bad imitations, right? They lack the qualities they need to be good. But there was a second part to that question that was really interesting about atomic bombs. Let me make sure I get the wording right here. Is there an ideal atomic bomb? Oh, it's called the sun. Somebody replied to them. Kellen says that Plato's God sounds a lot like the Christian God. Yeah, there's reasons for that. Yeah, a lot of the early Christian church fathers, people like St. Augustine, to a lesser extent St. Thomas Aquinas, a lot of them base their notion of God on the Neoplatonists. So certainly, when you look at some Christian theology, a lot of it is influenced by Plato and Jewish theology too. I would say Islamic theology to a lesser extent. They were much more moved by Aristotle, for sure.
Yeah, the Greeks had a lot of influence on Western religion. They don't like to talk about it, though, right? They don't want to admit it. But if you look at their readings, in fact, some of those early church fathers got in trouble, right? It was sort of like, you guys are using too many Greek arguments to support our faith. Stop doing that. Sort of looked frowned upon. But definitely a lot of similarities, so you're right to point that out. But as far as this idea of the atomic bomb, is there a form of atomic bomb? To me, that's another kind of conundrum for Plato. It's a problem that he himself, he admitted it was a problem. I don't think he ever fully worked it out. But in one of his later dialogues, Parmenides, one of the big questions is, well, how many forms are there? Is there a form for, it seems like the atomic bomb is a bad thing. So, like maybe that's why you brought that up. Well, is it good that we built the atomic bomb that can destroy the planet? Now nuclear bomb, that seems like a bad thing. So that's debatable. I don't know if I want to get into that whole debate because we wouldn't be here for a while discussing that. But let's just assume that the atomic bomb is a type of weapon. So there's form of weapon, okay? That would be the form of weapon. An atomic bomb would be, what, is there a form for atomic bomb? Is there a form for, what's another type of bomb? Hydrogen bomb? Is there a form of, nuclear? Is there a different form for every type of thing? I had one student asking one semester, is there a form for iPod or iPad or iPhone? And every version of the iPhone that they come out with is a better version. It's closer to the ideal version of iPhone. This seems kind of ridiculous. This is a problem that Plato admitted it was a problem. He thought he could fix it. I don't think he ever quite did. But Aristotle mentions this as a big criticism. He says, Plato, you're basically taking the universe and you're at least doubling it. Because for everything, you've got an idea that is associated with it. And not only that, but if you just isolate me as an individual, let's just take me, for instance. If you're trying to explain me, what am I? How do I explain Travis scientifically, biologically, chemically? You've got a lot of explaining to do to explain the organism that is me. But if you have not only the organism, but you've got all the qualities that I have. So I'm human, form of human. I'm a man, form of man. I'm a professor, form of professor. I'm very charming and handsome, charm, handsomeness, right? I'm very modest, modesty, right? So for every quality, there's a separate form. Where do we end here? And Plato never really had a good answer for this. It seems like he just adds confusion to this. I would think he would opt on there's a form of bomb, and atomic bomb is just one type of that. But still, why? Why did you pick that? In the dialogue Parmenides, he's asked about, is there a form of hair or fingernail or mud? And he's like, oh, yeah, I don't know. He wasn't quite sure how to answer it. Okay, we're still stuck in the cave. I think I kind of addressed that. Yeah, kind of. We got a body. We're physical. We're kind of, at least we got our foot somewhat in the material world. We can get out of it with philosophy by living a very ascetic lifestyle, a lifestyle that's detached from material things, and we can have glimpses at this eternal reality. But yeah, in a certain sense, we are somewhat stuck in the cave. I guess that would be accurate. Let's see. I'm looking at the comments here. 3 new ones. So Hassan said, we are our bodies. He seems to be very strongly rejecting Plato. But really, I think he would say that no, if your body is dead, it's not alive. Are you the same person, right? That body lying there, would you say that's you? Are you synonymous with your body? This is an age-old philosophical question. If you're a materialist, maybe an empiricist, you might just go with Hassan. Hey, you are your body. But then again, well, isn't your body always changing? So does that mean that you're never ever the same person? So every time your body changes, are you a new you? Like, what is it that connects your previous version of your body? Like, let's say you lose a bunch of weight, or you get older, you know, you get taller, right? You were a little kid at one time. I remember when I was a kid, I had a lot more hair than I do now, and it was a lot more blonde, right? I had bleach blonde hair till I was like 6 years old. I started getting darker, and so that's my body, that's me. But what is it about that 4-year-old, 5-year-old, 6-year-old that is still here now that's the same, whereas I call myself Travis, okay? Plato's going to say it's my soul. I have this thing called a soul. That's very metaphysical. What's a soul? We'll talk. I guess we'll talk more about this next time because we're running out of class time. But that's sort of the short answer for him, is that we've got this thing, this personality. You know, when Socrates was dying, his friends asked him where to bury him. And he looked at them funny, like, what are you talking about? You can't bury Socrates. It's not possible. Oh, I get it. You mean my body. Oh, well, just, I guess, wherever you think is appropriate, you know, a nice peaceful spot. So the idea is that his body was just a physical vessel for what was essential, what was really real. His form, maybe. That's debatable. You know, some Plato scholars think that each of us, like, there's a form of Travis, and there's a form of Eduardo, and a form of Hassan, right? And, you know, for each of our soul is our form, or something like that. And when we're being true to our true self, our true soul, then that's the right way to go. We're going to follow that. But that's one reading of Plato. So let me see. This is getting kind of interesting, but I got to wrap it up. We're coming short on time, but let me make sure. I'm going to respond to, there's a few more comments here, and then I'll see if anybody has anything else. And after that, we'll call it a day. Same idea as Dante. I'm not sure. So Andrew asked about Dante. Dante wrote the Divine Comedy. Some of you might be familiar with the part Inferno, where Dante goes down to hell, and these sort of different levels of hell. You know, I don't know. I'm sure that there's some parallels with Dante's theology and Plato's. I mean, Plato did seem to think that there were levels in the afterlife, and that if you're a good person, that you would be higher up and you'd be closer to the gods and closer to the divine truth. And if you lived a life that was attached to physical things, that your afterlife would probably not be like that. In fact, you might even come back and be reincarnated. You know, if you're attached to the physical world, you follow wealth and sex and pleasure. When you die and you don't have a body anymore, it's not very good. You don't like it. You want to get back to the physical. But he says if you live the life of a philosopher and you detach yourself from the physical, then you'll be ready for this. You'll be ready to contemplate truth, and you'll look forward to the afterlife. Okay, so let me look at some of the other comments. Okay, a lot of these were just responses to that earlier question about are there bad forms. Plato's response to, is there a perfect atomic bomb? WTF is an atomic bomb. Yeah, he wouldn't know what you're talking about. Yeah, but to be fair, these philosophers, especially people like Plato, they tend to try to speak in these universalistic terms, like all beds, all beautiful things, the good itself, right? So if they're going to set themselves up for this, then that's kind of a fair objection. I know you're joking, but it's kind of a fair objection. Like, what are you talking about, atomic bomb? Like, a good philosopher should look forward to the future and say, well, there might be a future scenario where they invent something like this, and does my philosophy account for that? So as silly and funny, I mean, it was a funny comment. I think it's actually pretty good objection. Somebody says, yeah, every 10 years or so, all of your atoms, all the cells that make you up have been replaced. So yeah, that's a good point, right? That's the big argument against the materialist view of a self. If you are your body, well, you're not the same body you were 10 years ago. All your cells have been replaced. So are you a new person every 10 years? Aristotle, in one of his writings, talks about, if you have a ship on the ocean that's like 100 years old, and over the course of that 100 years, every part of the ship has been replaced. Not all at once, but piece by piece, right? One of the boards got broken, so they replaced it. The sail got a tear in it, they replaced the sail. The mast fell off, so they had to get a new mast. Okay, so all the parts of the ship eventually, one by one, were replaced. So now every part of it is absolutely new. Is it still the same ship? You know, if you have, like, let's say you go to the Alamo in San Antonio, there's only like one part of that building that's the original building. What if they tore down the original part of that building brick by brick and put in another brick that was the same material? They even got, you know, period, you know, stuff from that period, and found like refurbished stuff and replaced it. Would it still be the Alamo? What makes the Alamo the Alamo? What makes Travis Travis, right? So Gerardo mentions the ship of Theseus paradox. That's what I'm referring to from Aristotle. This is the conundrum of identity. How do you identify something? What makes a thing its own thing? And when we start talking about the soul and the self and the body and what is that, all these issues will definitely spring up. So I feel like we got quite sidetracked there, but it was an interesting digression. So I hope we got something out of it. I don't think, even though we didn't touch upon art so much, I do think hopefully the participants here have a better understanding of Plato's metaphysics, right? His, you know, this idea of what a form is, because that was my main goal today. And so now next class we'll see how does he apply this to artistic expression, right? How does his theory of forms apply to art, and what makes good art, what makes bad art, and how we're supposed to judge that. So I guess I'll shut up. That's a good place to stop. Does anybody have any last minute things to say, or maybe put in the comments a question, anything like that? Okay, I'm not seeing anything, so I'm going to go and pause the video.